They will ask me later how I felt in the moment the compact fleet resolved on our long-range instruments. They will want something eloquent, something that honors the weight of what we had all waited our entire lives to do. My answer will disappoint them. I felt cold. Not the cold of fear, the cold of a machine coming to temperature, a turbine winding up from a long standstill, every component precisely where it was set to be. I had trained for that morning for 31 years. Every engineer under my command had trained for longer than that. The Solon array itself had been in continuous preparation for 11 generations. When the alarm tones filled the command apex and I looked at the transit signature spreading across the detection board, I did not feel dread or exhilaration or the particular tightness of old anger finally resolved. I felt the calibration settle. The machine was ready. I was the machine. That is the truest thing I can tell you about the morning. The Veth Compact came home to harvest us. My name is Sarana Voss. I held the rank of engineer commander of the Solon array for 19 years before the compact arrived, and I held it for 4 years after. I am telling this account now at the request of the Memorial Directorate, so that there exists a first-person record of what occurred at the array on that day, in the voice of someone who was at its center, and who has had long enough since to understand what she was part of. I will tell it plainly. There is no other way to tell it that the thing deserves. Begin at the beginning. Begin 80,000 years before I was born. The Veth Compact, that is the name we assigned them, translated as precisely as our linguists could manage from the fragment record they left behind. Their own designation for themselves is longer, a concatenation of sounds that implies something closer to the persistent arrangement of those who extract and return. But we found the compressed form sufficient for operational use. They are not a civilization in the way we use that word. They are a commercial collective, a syndicate of species, plural, multiple member kinds operating under a shared contract law and pooling their logistics infrastructure across extraction routes that span distances our early astronomers could only approximate. They do not conquer in the way empires conquer. They do not occupy. They do not colonize. They assess, catalog, extract, and move on, and they return on a schedule. The schedule is the thing that matters. The schedule is the thing humanity understood and built against. 80,000 years ago, the compact came to Earth for what the fragment record indicates was at minimum their third visit. Whether the first 2 visits are preserved anywhere in human memory, in mythology, in archaic oral tradition, in the deep cultural bedrock of civilizations long gone, we have theories but no certainties. What we know with confidence is that the third visit was the one that left evidence we could eventually decode. They established what they called, in the formal notation of their operational records, an intake lattice. 14,000 kilometers of conductor infrastructure woven into the planetary surface, beneath mountain ranges, across ocean floors, threaded through the bedrock of 6 continents in a distribution pattern that, once we understood what we were looking at, made an uncomfortable kind of logical sense. Every node placed for maximum biological coverage. Every segment run to minimize surface disruption and maximize extraction efficiency. It was, in its own terms, an elegant piece of engineering. I have spent enough years studying it to be able to say that honestly, without the saying of it costing me more than I want to spend. Its purpose was biological extraction. A harvest apparatus that drew from living populations across the globe and collected the biological yield in transit-stable containers for processing off-planet. They catalogued Earth as a Class 7 dormant livestock world, viable population, established biological diversity, cyclically renewable, worth the cost of a return trip, worth the investment of the lattice infrastructure. The numbers in their operational record for this site, as we decoded them, were precise in the way that all industrial accounting is precise. We were an entry in a ledger. They stayed for what our stratigraphic evidence suggests was between 800 and 1200 years. Then they completed their collection cycle, retracted what they could of the lattice surface infrastructure, and departed. Their instruments logged Earth as a site that had been successfully extracted and would be ready for collection again in approximately 80,000 years, at which point the biological population would have recovered to harvestable density. They did not consider that the population might remember. They had no operational reason to. In their experience, across whatever range of worlds their extraction routes covered, the populations involved in harvest operations did not persist, did not maintain records across the timescales their collection cycle implied, did not, in short, spend 80,000 years getting ready for them. They should have considered it, but they did not. That omission is the hinge on which everything turns. The fragment record was found by a survey team conducting geological sampling in a deep excavation below what is now the eastern shelf of the Solon Plateau, 11,000 years ago by our calendar. The plateau had been identified as a region of unusual deep substrate regularity. The bedrock formations there had anomalous conductive properties that early geologists attributed to mineral composition, and that later, more careful, analysis attributed to something else entirely. The survey team found the first conductor segment at a depth of 340 meters, a length of material that was not any naturally occurring mineral combination, running horizontally through the rock at a precision that rock does not achieve on its own. They brought it up. They looked at it for a very long time. Then they brought up more of it and looked at more of it, and eventually found the sealed archive node buried alongside a major intersection of the lattice grid. A node that the compact had, presumably, left as standard operational documentation for their own returning teams, encoded in their archival format, never intending for it to be found or read by anything other than their own equipment. It took 400 years to decode enough of the node to understand its function. I want to sit with that number for a moment, because I think it is easy to read it and move past it without feeling its weight. 400 years. The scholars who began the decoding work were not alive to see the first coherent translations. Their students were not alive. Their students were not, in most cases, alive. The work was passed forward across generations of linguists and materials scientists and cryptographers who spent their professional lives on a problem they would not solve, contributing incremental progress that would only become legible as understanding several lifetimes later. They did this because it was the correct thing to do. I do not know how to say that more plainly than that. It was the correct response to an unresolved question, and so they continued. That decision, not a dramatic decision, not a decision anyone would have called heroic at the time, just the daily decision to keep working, is the foundation on which everything else was built. By the time the fragment record was sufficiently decoded to understand the compact's operational record for this site, we knew three things with confidence: what they had done here, what they intended to do upon their return, and approximately when that return would occur. The third item was the most important. The compact's collection cycle for Earth was encoded as a specific interval, with the last completion date in the record's own time notation. Our astronomers spent the better part of a century converting that notation to our own calendar. The result had an error margin of roughly plus or minus 300 years across an 80,000-year span, which is, in astronomical terms, impressively precise. 80,000 years from the date of last extraction. Give or take 3 centuries, mark your calendar. We marked it, and we did not forget it for a single generation of the 80,000 years that followed. The marking was the first act of the preparation. Everything that came after it was a continuation of the same act. The work that followed the decoding is the subject of more detailed accounts than this one: technical histories, engineering records, the generational succession documents of the array's construction directorates. I will not attempt to reproduce those here in anything like their full scope. What I will do is describe what the Solon array is and how it came to exist, because you cannot understand what happened on the morning of the compact's return without understanding what we had built to answer them. The compact's intake lattice, the extraction infrastructure they had woven into our planetary bedrock over 800 to 1200 years of prior occupation, was not retrieved when they departed. Retrieval of buried infrastructure is expensive, and the compact is, at its core, a commercial enterprise. It calculates costs against returns with the same unsentimental precision it applies to everything else. The lattice was buried deep, the retrieval cost was non-trivial, and the infrastructure would be needed again in 80,000 years. The calculation resolved easily. Leave it. It will be there when we return. The calculation was correct in its own terms. The lattice was there when they returned. It was just not theirs anymore. Reverse engineering the lattice conductors began approximately 500 years after the fragment record was first decoded. Once we understood well enough what we were looking at to begin taking measured, methodical samples from non-critical nodes, without compromising the overall structural integrity of the grid. The material science involved was unlike anything we had encountered in any natural or manufactured substance in our own development. It took 300 years of sustained effort by materials divisions across multiple continents to produce our first successful synthetic replication of even the simplest conductor alloy. 300 years to copy a wire. I say that not to diminish the achievement. It was an extraordinary achievement, but to give you the correct sense of the gradient of difficulty involved in what we were undertaking. We were not tinkering with something we understood. We were learning an entirely foreign engineering language from first principles, using as our textbook a partial operational manual we had spent 4 centuries decoding. The first successful activation of a reverse-engineered lattice segment, a length of conductor running between 2 adjacent nodes, energized at the correct resonant frequency, and confirmed to be carrying the compact's electromagnetic signature, occurred 612 years after the material science effort began. I am told the laboratory that achieved it maintained a tradition for centuries afterward of marking the anniversary with a small private ceremony. I find that detail moving in a way I do not entirely know how to account for. The conversion of the full lattice from an extraction system to a projection system, from an apparatus designed to draw biological material inward and upward for collection, to an apparatus designed to project electromagnetic output outward in the specific frequency ranges and amplitudes we needed, took 6,000 years. 6,000 years, from the first successful activation of a single synthetic segment to the commissioning of the Solon array as a fully operational planetary-scale transmission system. The work happened in phases, with each phase building on the last, and with significant portions of the engineering effort running in parallel across multiple continents for much of that span. The command apex was the last major structure completed, the coordination and control hub from which the full 14,000-kilometer network could be managed as a single instrument. It was commissioned 340 years before the compact arrived. 340 years is a long time to maintain a system in standby mode. It is also a long time to be certain you will need it, without any confirming evidence that your certainty is justified. The array's standby period is the part of this history that I think about the most in the years since. We had built the instrument. We had tested every component we could test without revealing our existence to outer system observers. We had run the simulations until the simulation results were more familiar than the actual equipment. And then we waited, for 340 years, for the compact to show up and justify everything. I have read the command journals from the standby period extensively, all 47 predecessor commands, in the portions that have been digitized and made available to succeeding engineer commanders as part of the role's institutional memory. What strikes me most in reading them is not the moments of doubt or the expressions of impatience, though those are present in the earlier journals and honest in their own way. What strikes me most is the steadiness of tone across 340 years of writing by 47 different people with 47 different personalities and 47 different ways of occupying a desk. The steadiness is not the steadiness of people who are all alike. It is the steadiness of people who understand, each in their own way, what the work is for, and who have decided that the understanding is sufficient. You can hear it in the language shift between one command's final entry and the next command's first entry. The handoff voice, specific and practical, saying here is what we have and here is what needs attention and here is what the next period will likely require. Not heroic, not elegiac, operational. The language of people who are passing forward, something they consider important enough to be worth passing forward with care. One entry from the 22nd Engineer Commander, a woman named Etta Solaris who held the post for 11 years, roughly 200 years into the standby period, has stayed with me since I first read it. She wrote near the end of her final journal the following: "The compact will arrive in our grandchildren's 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 time. I have done my part. I expect them to do theirs. This is not faith. It is a reasonable inference from the fact that we are all, generation after generation, the same kind of people making the same kind of decision. We do not require a vision of the outcome to continue. We require only that the work be real and the reason for it honest. Both are." I read that entry during my second year as engineer commander and I thought about it for a long time. I still think about it. Etta Solaris held the post for 11 years and never saw the compact and passed the command to her successor with the same practical handoff voice as everyone else. That is what the work looked like from the inside for most of the people who did it. Not a vigil, not a sacrifice, a job done well passed on. Every generation of the array's maintenance and command staff during that standby period chose, again, to maintain the work. The command succession records list every engineer commander from commissioning to my own appointment, 47 individuals across 340 years, most of whom served for between 5 and 10 years before passing the role to a successor. Most of them, in the statistical probability of it, never truly expected to see what they were maintaining the array for. They maintained it anyway. They trained their successors in procedures that might never need to be executed. They calibrated equipment whose operational moment they might never live to see. They did this because it was what they had been asked to do, and because they understood why they had been asked to do it. I am the 48th Engineer Commander of the Solon Array. I held the post for 19 years before the morning everything I have described above was finally, decisively, justified. I want to say something about what it was like to carry that responsibility through those 19 years, because I think it is relevant to understanding what I felt on the morning of the compact's arrival, and I think the honest account of it is different from what people who have not carried this kind of responsibility might expect. For the first several years of my command, the weight of it was present as a conscious thing. I thought about it often, what we were for, what the compact's arrival would mean, what I might be asked to do. I rehearsed scenarios. I ran drills beyond what was operationally required. I read the fragment record again from start to finish at least twice a year. I was, I think, anxious in a focused way, which is different from fear but occupies some of the same cognitive space. Around my 7th year, the anxiety shifted into something else, something I struggled to name for a long time and eventually settled on calling competence. I knew the array. I knew the team. I knew the procedures. I had run every component of what we might need to do enough times that the run-through had stopped feeling like preparation and started feeling like memory. Not my personal memory, the memory of the system, the distributed memory of 11,000 people who knew their piece of it and trusted their colleagues to know theirs. That kind of competence is not the same as certainty. It is not arrogance. It is the thing that remains when you have done the work long enough that the work has become part of you. After 7 or 8 years, I stopped thinking about what I might be asked to do and started simply knowing how to do it. That is why I felt cold on the morning the alert tone sounded. Not absence of feeling. The feeling of perfect readiness, which is its own temperature. The detection alert came in at 3:40 station time. Transit signature outer system bearing inward. I was in the command apex within 12 minutes of the first tone. My quarters were in the lower complex, deliberately close. I had always kept them close. My senior analyst, Thomas Brecht, had the board fully lit by the time I arrived. Brecht was a precise, economical man, not cold exactly, but someone who spent his words the way a careful person spends money, never more than was needed. He pointed at the primary display and said 4 words. Multiple vessels, inbound, compact. The transit signature matched the fragment record's encoded return flag across 17 distinct spectral parameters. We had built the detection system to recognize exactly that signature. It recognized it. I looked at the board for approximately 4 seconds. Then I turned to the communication station and said, "Wake the council, wake the fleet, stand by on array power." I went to my chair and sat down. There was nothing else to do for the next several hours, and I had learned 19 years ago that the most important contribution a commander makes while waiting is not to consume herself in the waiting. The wait is part of the preparation. Use it correctly. It is 12 hours from outer system transit emergence to orbital approach at standard compact drive velocity, based on the trajectory parameters encoded in the fragment record. We had 12 hours to complete our final array calibration check, and to have the planetary defense fleet assume positions that would not, under any circumstances, appear threatening before the moment we chose. The compact needed to approach to scan, to see what their instruments told them about this world. We needed them close before we did anything else. The approach itself was part of what we were showing them, though they did not yet know it. I spent 4 of those 12 hours running the array calibration sequence personally, not because the automated systems required my hand on them. They did not. The automation on the array was sophisticated enough to run the energization sequence without human supervision, but I needed something to do with the whole of my attention, and this was the right something. The calibration was mine. Every segment, every node, every transmission array along 14,000 kilometers of planetary surface. I wanted to know them all one more time before the morning became what it was going to become. I should say something about what those 4 hours were like, because I think they are as representative of what all the preparation amounted to as any single moment I could point to. Running a calibration on the array is not dramatic work. Segment by segment, node confirmation by node confirmation, power level check by power level check. Most of the readings come back clean without comment. When a reading is anomalous, it gets flagged and investigated and usually resolved within a few minutes, because anomalies on a well-maintained system are almost always simple things. A sensor that has drifted slightly from calibration, a connection that needs reseating, a power fluctuation in a secondary feed. The work is methodical and repetitive, and it requires attention in the specific way that methodical, repetitive work requires attention, which is a different quality of attention than vigilance or alertness. It is closer to listening. You listen to the system, and the system tells you what it is. You keep your hands steady and your mind present, and you do not let the magnitude of what the morning will become pull you out of the immediate task of making sure the segment in front of you is reading correctly. The segment in front of you is what you can do something about. Everything else is already decided, or will be decided by the moment when it arrives. My staff did the same, each at their own station, each in their own way. The command apex was not silent during those 4 hours. The equipment generates its working sounds. The communications posts were handling routine traffic. The tactical display updated its readings every 30 seconds with a soft chime. But the human voices were quiet. Not solemn, exactly. Focused. There is a quality of quiet in a room full of competent people who are all attending to the right thing at the right moment that is different from ordinary professional quiet. I have been in enough operational environments to recognize it. It settled over the apex sometime in the second hour and held through the fourth, until the calibration was complete, and I stood the sequence down and looked at the board, and saw every segment confirmed clean, and felt the particular satisfaction of that. The array had been at full standby for 11 months, since the outer system detection posts, 900 years into their silent watch, had first flagged the transit precursor signatures that told us the compact was in approach, and we likely had less than a year. Bringing the array from standby to full operational readiness involves a sequential energization of 11,000 primary conductor segments across 14,000 kilometers of planetary surface. The sequence takes 7 hours at nominal speed. I ran it in 10, carefully, making sure every segment reported clean before the compact reached scanning range. I was not in a hurry. I had waited long enough that an extra 3 hours made no difference except to the calibration, and the calibration deserved the time. They all reported clean, every single one. At hour 7, I stepped out onto the observation deck to check the array's energized state from the outside. The Solon Plateau was cold at that hour. It is high ground, and the morning air comes off the eastern desert with an edge that does not give up quickly. The conductor pillars were lit now, in the specific sense that they carry a faint luminescence in their transmission arrays when at operational power, not dramatic, not visible to someone who does not know what they are looking at, but clearly present once you know the signature. The light was just coming in from the east, low and amber, catching the pillar heads in a way that made them look different from how they look under full daylight. I stood on the deck for 3 or 4 minutes. The plateau stretched out from the apex in every direction, 300 kilometers of high desert and rock and the regular geometry of the array. And the sky above it was that particular deep blue of early morning at elevation when the sun is not yet fully up. I have stood on that deck a great many times. I know exactly how it looks. I looked at it differently that morning. I was aware of looking at it differently, which is its own kind of feeling. Then I went back inside and waited for the compact to arrive. Their fleet came to orbital approach at hour 11. Long-range visual acquisition gave us 22 vessels. A mix of configurations that matched the fragment record's imagery closely enough to confirm identification with high confidence. Extraction haulers in the majority. 4 larger platforms our analysts understood to be processing units capable of handling the yield from a full extraction cycle, and 6 vessels we assessed as escort craft, though their armament profile was considerably lighter than what our planetary defense fleet could field. Light escort for an extraction operation at a livestock world they had no reason to expect resistance from. The compact is, as I have said, a professional organization. It does not over-resource operations. A Class 7 dormant livestock world requires extraction teams, processing capacity, and enough security to discourage opportunistic competition from rival extraction concerns, not a combat fleet. They had brought what their procedures said they needed. Their procedures had not accounted for what they were approaching. They began their standard approach sequence. Extraction haulers moving to assessment positions in the lower orbital band. Processing platforms holding in high orbit. Escort craft arranging themselves between the fleet and the inbound approach corridor from the outer system. Standard posture against a rival operation moving in on a contracted site, not against anything coming up from below. I was watching this on the tactical display in the command apex when Brecht said, with the same flatness he used for everything, "They're beginning lattice probe." Lattice probe, the compact's standard first operational step in re-engaging an extraction site, transmitting the activation frequency to the buried lattice conductors, waking up their harvest infrastructure, confirming that the installation they had built and left was still functional and ready for the collection cycle. They had left that lattice in our ground 80,000 years ago, and they were now transmitting the activation codes. The specific resonant frequencies encoded in the fragment record's operational section, the codes that would, in their expectation, bring a dormant harvest apparatus back online and report it as ready. The array received the activation transmission on the exact frequencies the fragment record had given us. We had been listening for those frequencies for 11 months. We had been prepared to listen for them for 11 generations before that. I had a decision to make in that moment. I want to be honest about how I made it, because I have been asked about it many times in the years since, and I think the honest account is more useful than the satisfying one. The satisfying account goes, in that moment I felt the full weight of 80,000 years of preparation, of every generation that had worked and waited, of the debt owed and now being answered, and I made a decision commensurate with that weight. The honest account is simpler. I looked at the activation transmission on the board, and I knew what we were going to do, because we had decided what we were going to do a long time ago and had spent a great deal of careful effort making sure we were able to do it. The decision in that moment was not whether, it was when. And the when was now because the compact was in position and their activation query was live in the system, and there would not be a better moment. I told the array to respond. Not with the extraction-ready signal the compact expected, with what we had built the array to send. When the Solon array answered the compact's lattice probe, what it transmitted was not an operational status report from a dormant harvest installation. It was a full-spectrum broadcast across every frequency band. The compact's communications architecture was capable of receiving, carrying a single compressed data package. A package our linguists had spent 400 years preparing, encoding in the compact's own archival data format, structured precisely according to the organizational schema their internal record-keeping systems were designed to ingest, not approximated, not translated loosely. Built to their exact specifications, from the fragment record's documentation of those specifications, so that their systems would accept it as native data and parse it correctly. The package contained 80,000 years of human history. Not a summary, not a curated selection designed for rhetorical effect, not a message of defiance or warning or the kind of formal declaration composed with an eye on how it would read in retrospect. The complete record, every stratum of it. It began with the Geological Survey report that had first identified the lattice's presence in the bedrock. The stratigraphic evidence, the anomalous conductive signatures, the sample series, the excavation reports, the first recovered conductor segment, every document from the initial discovery in sequence with every supporting data set attached. Then 400 years of decoding work, annotated at every stage, the approaches that failed and why they failed, the partial translations that held up and the ones that had to be revised, the breakthrough moments, the long periods where progress was measured in fractions of a percent per decade, and ultimately the decoded operational record itself with our full commentary on every element of it. Then 300 years of material science work. Every laboratory report from the conductor replication effort, the failed syntheses and the partial successes, and the 300 years of accumulated knowledge that eventually produced a material indistinguishable in function from what the compact had buried in our ground. Then the engineering records for the lattice conversion, 6,000 years of phased construction work, with the project succession documents showing how the directorship had passed from one generation of engineers to the next, and what had been completed, and what remained, and what decisions had been made about sequencing and resource allocation, and the long periods where the conversion could not be advanced because other demands took precedence and the work had to wait. We included the 900 years of outer system silence records, every listening post, every frequency monitor, every year of data showing what we had heard and what we had not transmitted in response, and the decision records for maintaining that silence across 9 centuries of accumulated temptation to break it. There had been debates. There had been periods where some on the council argued that the silence was no longer necessary, that our capabilities were sufficient to make concealment irrelevant. The debates were in the record with their resolutions. We did not hide the disagreements. We sent them everything. We sent the population figures. The count from the fragment record, the number the compact had logged for Earth's population at the time of the last extraction, the number they had assumed would recover to harvestable density over 80,000 years, and the count from our own census, current as of the morning of their arrival, and the documents that explained, in detail, what the gap between those two numbers represented in human terms, and what the recovery had required, and what the people who recovered had chosen to make of that recovery. We sent the full architectural specification of the array, every conductor segment, every transmission node, every calibration parameter, every power system calculation, the complete engineering documentation for what the compact's lattice had become, not obscured, not partial, complete so that there was no ambiguity about what they were being shown, so that anyone with sufficient technical competence to read the document would understand, without needing to be told, what the array was capable of doing to their fleet at the current orbital distance. All of it, the complete record of 80,000 years. We transmitted the package in 4.7 seconds. The silence that followed was the most specific silence I have ever occupied. Every monitor in the command apex was live, reading every available compact frequency. The tactical display showed the fleet's positions. The extraction haulers had been on their approach vectors when we transmitted, moving with the slow precision of large vessels that know where they are going, and they had stopped. Not abruptly, these were not craft designed for rapid maneuvering, but they had stopped moving toward assessment positions and were now holding. Something had caused them to reconsider their vectors. Something required their attention before they continued. The silence held for 11 minutes and 40 seconds. I did not move from my chair. My staff did not speak. Brecht watched the frequency monitors with the expression he wore when he was concentrating, which was nearly identical to the expression he wore all other times, distinguished only by a slight narrowing around the eyes. The 11,000 array staff across the 14,000-kilometer network were at their stations. The planetary defense fleet was in position. 3 billion people on the surface of the Earth went about the morning of an ordinary day in the knowledge that this morning was not ordinary, and waited. 11 minutes and 40 seconds. Then a transmission originated from the compact fleet, not on a standard operational frequency, on the band that the fragment record had identified as their emergency consultation channel, the frequency used for fleet internal communication in situations outside normal operational parameters, which told us, immediately, several things: that the transmission had been received and processed, that it had been understood well enough to constitute a situation outside normal operational parameters, and that the compact fleet was having a conversation with itself, not with us. We could receive the emergency consultation frequency. We could not decode it in real time. The encryption schema for that channel was not fully represented in the fragment record, and our cryptographers had made significant but not complete progress on it. What we could do was record it. Our linguists spent months on the recording afterward and eventually produced a partial transcript, perhaps 60% complete, which I have read. I will not reproduce it here in detail. What I will tell you is that the partial transcript reads as a methodical, professional assessment of an unexpected operational situation. Not panicked, not outraged, methodical. There is a difference and it matters. The compact is, as I have said, a professional organization, and professional organizations faced with unexpected situations of significant magnitude do not panic. They assess. The partial transcript shows an assessment. The tone is the tone of people who have encountered a problem they did not anticipate and are working systematically through its implications. The fleet's internal consultation lasted 47 minutes. Then they transmitted to us on a standard communication frequency, addressed to the surface of the planet using the planetary address encoding from the fragment record's documentation of their communication protocols. The address they would use when transmitting operational instructions to an extraction site. They were using the form of a communication to a subordinate installation. That detail was not lost on us. It was also not surprising. The compact defaults to form. Form is the container for professional behavior in situations where improvisation risks errors. Using the standard address form was not a gesture of dominance. It was the behavior of an organization keeping itself organized. The transmission was short, encoded in the formal notation of a compact operational status update. It said extraction assessment suspended, world record status under revision, contract cycle pending internal review. I read it 3 times. Then I told my senior communications officer to transmit the escort request. The escort request was a navigation package, a set of departure vectors, one for each of the 22 vessels in the compact fleet, that would take them from their current orbital positions to a clear transit point in the outer system, and from there onto a departure corridor back to wherever they had originated. The vectors were calculated with full knowledge of each vessel's drive profile, its dimensional parameters, its current orbital velocity and orientation. Knowledge that could only have come from a detailed study of the fragment record, and from 31 months of close observation since the first precursor signatures had alerted us to the approach. The precision of the navigation package was its own communication, as deliberate as any word in the transmission. We were not threatening them. We had not fired anything. We had transmitted historical documentation and a navigation package. The subtext was precise, and we had made it precise intentionally. We know your ships. We know your systems, we know your protocols. We have had 80,000 years to prepare for this moment, and the navigation package is a courtesy. You may take it or not. The choice is yours, but we have shown you what informs our position. The compact fleet began moving to the escort vectors within 6 minutes of receiving the package. I watched them on the tactical display. The extraction haulers adjusting their orbital positions first, the large processing platforms taking longer to bring their mass onto the new vectors, the escort craft falling into the configuration our navigation package had specified for them. 22 vessels, organized, deliberate, professional, moving in an orderly sequence toward the departure corridor. I want to be precise about what I felt in those minutes. There was something that resembled satisfaction, but sat lower and quieter than satisfaction usually sits. There was something that resembled relief, though the readiness in my body did not release. I would not let it release. Not yet. Not until the last signature had faded from the outer system instruments. There was something that I want to call grief, and I think that word is the honest one, though it will seem strange in this context to people who expect a different kind of accounting from this moment. Here is what I mean by grief. The compact came to Earth expecting livestock. What they found had been shaped in a meaningful sense by what they had done to us 80,000 years ago. Every generation of work that produced the Solon array, every year of the outer system silence, every increment of the decoding effort and the material science work and the conversion engineering, all of that was motivated, ultimately, by what had been done here and what we remembered having been done here. The preparation was ours. The discipline was ours. The patience was ours. I am not diminishing any of it by saying that its origin lay in a wound. Most great preparations originate in wounds. That is the nature of the world. But the wound was real. The fragment record is specific enough that we know what was taken. We know the scale of the extraction operation. We have reconstructed, with reasonable confidence, the population of Earth before the compact's third visit and the population after it. I will not state those numbers. They do not need to be stated to be understood. What was done to people who were our people across 80,000 years of unbridgeable distance, and no outcome and no preparation and no diplomatic success closes that distance. The people it was done to are gone, and they cannot be restored. The weight of what was done to them is not erased by what we were able to do and answer. I thought about that while I watched the fleet reorient. There is a tradition in my family, not formal, not written down anywhere, just a thing that has passed from one generation to the next in the way that such things do, of keeping a small object that came from the first excavation of the lattice. Not the conductor material itself. That is in the technical archives. Something more ordinary. A piece of the bedrock that was displaced when the survey team reached the first buried segment. A piece of the ground that had been above the compact's work for 80,000 years, covering it, not knowing what was below. My family has kept this piece of rock for 6 generations. I had it in my quarters in the lower complex on the morning of the compact's arrival. I thought about it while I watched the fleet move. I thought about the survey team that had displaced it 11,000 years ago, people who had no idea what they were beginning, who had found something strange in the ground and done the correct thing, which was to study it and report it and start the long work of understanding it. The stone is ordinary. The act that found it was ordinary. The 80,000 years of decisions that followed it were mostly ordinary. The accumulated weight of ordinary decisions made correctly, across enough time, is not ordinary at all. Before the compact fleet crossed the orbital boundary into open transit approach, we transmitted a final package to the lead processing platform. The vessel that, based on the fragment record's organizational schema, would carry the fleet commander's primary operations station. The package was small, 3 elements. The first was a compressed extract from the array's architectural record, specifically, the section documenting what the original lattice extraction infrastructure had been converted into. A precise, complete technical specification of every modification. In the compact's own engineering notation, where we had that notation available, and in our own where we did not, with a conversion key so that their technical staff could read either. The second was the population count comparison document, the number logged in the compact's operational record for Earth's pre-extraction population, the number from our current census, the supporting analysis, no rhetoric attached, the numbers themselves sourced and annotated. The third was a notation in the compact's formal record-keeping language, encoded to their site file schema, structured as an official addition to the operational record for this extraction site. Our linguists had been preparing this notation for decades, refining it as our understanding of the compact's formal language improved, ensuring that it was not merely comprehensible but correctly formed, a valid entry in their own record-keeping system, indistinguishable in format from an entry their own operations staff might make. The notation read, World Record Status Class 7 Dormant Livestock, reclassified to Class 0. Extraction operations, permanently suspended. This world has consumed its outstanding contract in full and has rendered the balance as follows. Below that notation, the full array architectural specification again, so that the phrase rendered the balance as follows was not ambiguous. We received a single-line acknowledgement from the lead platform before it completed its transit jump. The acknowledgement came in on the standard communication frequency, addressed to the planetary surface in the same form their first response had used. Our linguists spent 2 weeks on that acknowledgement. The compact's formal record-keeping language is dense, and the acknowledgement was formally constructed, which added layers of compressed meaning that took time to unpack correctly. When the translation was completed to a confidence level our senior linguists were satisfied with, it read as follows: The record has been updated. We will carry it. 6 words, or approximately 6 words, depending on how you resolve the compression in the formal notation. I have thought about those 6 words a great deal in the years since. What they mean in the compact's operational context, the formal acknowledgement of a record revision, the commitment to carry it within their internal documentation system, and what they mean beyond that context. Whether the compact is capable of meaning something beyond the operational. Whether a syndicate of species that treats worlds as entries in a commercial ledger has the capacity for a response that goes further than the formal. I do not know. I have concluded that it does not matter whether the meaning I find in those 6 words is the meaning the compact intended by them. The record was updated. They said so. They carried it. That is the operational outcome we needed. Anything beyond that is a question for philosophers and linguists, and they are welcome to it. The fleet completed its transit departure by mid-morning. I stood on the observation deck of the command apex for a while after the last signature faded from our outer system instruments. The plateau was cold. The wind was coming off the eastern desert in the way it does at that hour, steady, without gusts. The conductor pillars stood in the morning light, their luminescence fading now as I began the stand-on sequence, the operational energy dissipating back through the lattice into the ground that had held it for 80,000 years. The array was winding down. I was winding down, the machine finding its rest temperature. My deputy, Helera Moss, found me there. She was the kind of person who understood when to speak and when to simply stand beside someone, which is a quality I had valued in her for the full 19 years I had worked with her. She stood beside me for a while. Then she said, quietly, "My grandmother told me her grandmother told her that it would happen in our lifetimes. Everyone thought she was being optimistic." I considered that. She was right by 2 generations, not bad for an estimate across that kind of distance. Helera said nothing to that. The wind moved across the plateau. Below us, the Solon Plateau stretched westward into the distances, the array's conductor pillars receding in the morning haze until they were indistinguishable from the rock. I want to say something about the generations, because I do not think I have said it adequately yet, and it is the thing I most want to say. What we accomplished at the Solon Array on the morning of the compact's return was not accomplished by me. It was not accomplished by my generation, or by the generation that built the command apex, or by the generation that first successfully activated a reverse-engineered lattice segment. It was accomplished by every generation between the survey team that found the fragment record and the 48th Engineer Commander who stood in the command apex when the transit signature resolved. By every individual who made the ordinary, daily, unremarkable decision to continue the work and pass it forward and trust that the people who came after them would do the same. Most of those people did not prepare in the expectation of seeing the outcome. They could not have. The timescales involved made personal vindication mathematically unlikely for most contributors. They prepared because preparation was the correct response to what had been done, and because correct responses to wrongs do not require certainty of vindication to be worth making. They prepared because the work was there to be done, and they were the people whose turn it was to do it. That is a less dramatic explanation than the one that attributes everything to heroism or destiny or the particular virtue of a special generation. It is also, I believe, the true one. The extraordinary outcome was the accumulation of an extraordinary number of ordinary decisions, made correctly by an extraordinary number of ordinary people, across a span of time that none of them could hold in a single imagination. I have been asked in the years since what I believe the compact made of what they found, whether the encounter changed them, whether the reclassification we forced into their site records will hold, whether other extraction operations in their network will be redirected from Earth, whether the word will travel through whatever information-sharing structures the syndicate uses. I can only speculate. 4 years after the event, nothing had returned. In the years since my departure from the Array Command, as of this account's writing, nothing has returned. Whether the silence is permanent or temporary, whether the reclassification carries the weight within the compact's internal systems that we designed it to carry, is a question that only time will resolve. What I believe, based on everything I have observed and studied, The compact is old enough and experienced enough to recognize when a situation has moved beyond the parameters their operational procedures were designed to address. They are not a military force. They are an extraction collective, and they assess situations in terms of their core operational calculus. Is the cost of an action justified by its yield? The yield from Earth on the morning they arrived was not what their records had led them to expect, and the cost of any alternative approach to recovering that yield had been demonstrated to them in complete technical specificity in the array's architectural documentation. They made the assessment. Their assessment produced a departure vector. That is consistent with everything we know about how the compact operates. I think the 47 minutes of fleet internal consultation and the methodical professionalism of every transmission they sent us tells us something important. They were not frightened into departure. They were assessed into it. There is a difference. A frightened party acts unpredictably, returns with more force, looks for a way to reassert a position that has been made to feel threatened. An assessed party updates its records and adjusts its routing. The compact updated its records. We have the acknowledgement. We built the system to produce exactly that outcome, and it produced it. Whether it is enough, whether a reclassification in the compact's site file is sufficient to keep this world off their extraction schedule permanently, or whether eventually the economics will shift and the calculation will resolve differently, I do not know. I do not think anyone can know that with certainty. The Council has views on it, and the engineering directorates have views on it, and there are extensive and ongoing discussions about what the years ahead require in terms of maintaining and extending the array's capabilities, and about whether and how to attempt contact with other worlds in the compact's extraction network. Those discussions are above my level now. I am a retired engineer commander writing an account for the Memorial Directorate, not a policymaker. But I want to be honest about the fact that I do not consider the morning of the compact's arrival to be the end of a story. It is the end of a particular chapter, the chapter that contained the preparation and the answer. What comes after it is not yet written, and whether the writing of what comes after falls to my generation or to the ones that follow us, the principle that produced the array is still the correct one. Prepare, remember, pass it forward. Do not require vindication to continue the work. The Solon array remains at partial operational status. It will remain so indefinitely. The conductor pillars still stand on the plateau, still catch the light in the mornings the way they always have. The command apex is staffed as a monitoring station now rather than an active operational command. The calibration runs continue on a reduced schedule. The outer system detection posts are still listening. The archive holds everything, the full fragment record, the complete decoding history, the engineering records from every phase of the lattice conversion, the signal generation specifications, the array's full architectural documentation, the diplomatic record of the morning of the compact's departure, the partial transcript of their fleet internal consultation, the 2-week translation process for the 6-word acknowledgement, all of it. Indexed and cross-referenced and fully accessible to anyone who wants to understand what was done, and how and why. My youngest daughter, who was 7 when the compact arrived and is old enough now to understand what she was asking, asked me a few years ago what the array felt like from the inside on that morning. I told her it felt like a machine coming to temperature. She looked at me the way children look at adults who have given them accurate information that does not answer the question they actually asked. I tried again. I told her it felt like standing inside something that 11,000 people had built and 80,000 years of people before us had decided to build, and knowing, in the moment of it, that all of those people had been correct in what they chose to do, and that the knowing of that was not something that fit inside words that matched the size of it. She thought about that for a while in the serious way she has. Then she said, "Were you scared?" I thought about the morning, the cold, the calibration, the board lighting up with 22 vessels, Breck's 4 words, my hand steady on the console edge, the 4 seconds of looking at the board before I gave the first orders. No, I said. We had been ready for it too long to be scared of it. She considered that for a moment. Then she nodded, the way she nods when something has settled into the right place in her understanding. That is the truest account I am able to give of what happened at the Solon array on the morning the Veth Compact returned to harvest us. I have tried to make it accurate, and I have tried to make it honest, and I have tried to resist the shape that stories of this kind tend to take on over time. The shape that simplifies and elevates and loses the ordinary texture of how things actually happen in favor of a cleaner narrative that flatters the people at the center of it. The center of this story is not me. The center of this story is 80,000 years of people doing the correct thing when the correct thing was available to be done, without requiring that they be alive to see whether it worked. The compact came expecting livestock. They found the record of what was done to us and what we built from it. They found 80,000 years of a people who remembered and prepared and waited and were ready when the time came. We will carry that record too. We already have been for a long time now. We will go on carrying it. That is what it means to be ready.